winter storm hit their homestead before dawn. Ice locked the doors. Wind cut the air like a blade. The elders called it a night that tested the bones of the strongest. Yet a small Viking family stayed inside a low timber hall and waited. A father with frost on his beard. A mother with a silent newborn pressed to her chest. An older son who held a dull axe and shook in the corner. Their world shrank to firelight and fear. Wolves moved around the walls. Snow rose up the roof. People said no one lived through nights like these. But this family refused to fall. Their story is the one people whisper when storms rise. You clicked the tale of the Viking family who survived nights that would kill us today. You see a small hall in winter night. Snow pushes at the walls. Wind shakes the roof. The family inside holds together. A father, a mother, a newborn, an older son. They hear wolves press close. They hear ice crack under the weight of the storm. People in their village fear nights like these. They speak of lost groups and frozen halls. But this family stays awake. They hold their fire. They fight sleep. You stand in the doorway with them now. You hear each breath. You feel hunger and hope mix in the dark. Their hours shape the story you hear next. Settle in. Slow your breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let warmth reach your fingers. Pull a blanket close if you have one. Lower the lights if you want a calm space. Before we begin, I ask you where you watch from. I speak softly so you follow each moment without rush. If you enjoy calm Viking stories, I invite you to subscribe, like, and leave a gentle comment. Take a last, slow breath. Let the hall form around you. Let the snow fall outside your home. The storm rises, but you stay safe. Now we step toward the long night that shaped this family. The storm rose before the sun. The wind moved over the frozen plain and reached the small homestead first. The family felt it in the walls. The father, Leif, woke before the others. He pushed off the furs and stood by the door. A thin sheet of ice covered the wood. He knew the storm held more force than the last one. He pressed his hand to the cold surface. The air bit his skin. He stayed still and listened. The wind pushed snow hard against the hall. It sounded like sand on shields. He drew in one slow breath and held it in his chest. The room stayed dark. The fire burned low. The smoke curled up toward the beams. Behind him, his wife Runa sat up. She held the newborn close. The child had no name yet. They waited for the days to grow brighter before they named her. Runa knew she needed to keep the child warm. She tucked the small body under her tunic. The heat from her skin reached the child fast. She felt each small breath. She rocked in place and listened to the wind press at the hall. Their son, Brand, sat on a fur near the fire. His axe lay beside his foot. The blade held a thin rust line near the edge. He rubbed it each night with oil, but the cold took strength from metal as well as from men. He pulled the axe close. He leaned forward. His eyes stayed on the father, then on the door, then on the fire. He wanted to rise, but the cold held him still. Each gust made him grip the handle tighter. Leif turned from the door. His beard held frost. He moved toward the fire and crouched down. He added small sticks first. Then he added thicker wood. The flames rose. A warm glow touched the walls. He looked at Brand. "You stay ready," Leif said. Brand nodded. He tightened his grip on the axe. The hall shook. A soft groan came from the beams. Leif looked at the roof. Snow pressed down on it in slow waves. He knew the weight of snow. He knew how long the beams held. He also knew how fast the storm moved. Runa shifted the newborn under her tunic. She looked at Leif. "How long?" she asked. Leif listened once more. "The storm grows. It holds strength." "We stay inside," he said. Brand lowered his head. His breath formed a pale cloud. Leif moved to the wall and pushed aside a small wood plank near the floor. A faint hole in the wall opened. Snow blew through at once. He placed his hand outside. The snow came high, higher than the last storm, higher than he liked. He shut the hole again. Runa watched him. Her mind moved through every task. Water, food, fire, warmth. She checked the furs around her legs. Then she moved closer to the fire and sat low. The newborn rested between her ribs and arm. She rubbed the small back with her thumb. The child slept through the noise. The storm spoke through the walls, but the child heard only the heart of its mother. Leif stood still for a long moment. He watched the fire. The fire sent light up the walls and across the beams. He knew the hall held their life. He knew the hall needed support if the storm grew stronger. He looked at Brand again. "Bring me the 2 thick posts," he said. Brand rose. His legs shook from cold and fear. He crossed the hall and pulled 2 timber posts from the far wall. He dragged them across the floor. Runa shifted so they had space. Leif lifted the first post. He pushed it under a roof beam and wedged it in tight. The wood groaned. He lifted the second post and placed it near the first. He hit it with his shoulder until it fit under the beam. He stepped back. The roof sat more firm. Runa watched him. Her breath eased for a moment. "Good," she said. Leif stepped toward her. He knelt beside her and the newborn. His hand rested on the small shape hidden under her tunic. His touch stayed warm. "We outlast this," he said. Runa nodded. She believed him. She trusted him. But she also feared the storm. She feared what moved in storms: wind, hunger, wolves, spirits old people spoke of. She pushed those thoughts away. She focused on the child. Brand moved closer to the fire. He held his hands near the flames. His fingers hurt from the return of heat. He looked toward the door again. A low sound came from outside. Not wind, not ice. A slow step in the snow. Another step, then a snarl. Brand froze. Leif heard it too. He stood and reached for his axe. His hand closed around the handle. The weight steadied him. Runa pulled the newborn close to her chest. Her breath came slow and deep. Leif walked to the door. He placed his ear to the wood. The snarl came again. Closer. He looked toward Brand. "Wolves," Brand whispered. Leif nodded once. "Wolves smell fear, smell hunger." "They follow storms," Leif said. Brand looked at the door. He held his axe high enough to strike. Leif stepped from the door. He motioned for Brand to hold still. He moved to the wall near the fire. He grabbed a heavy shield made of pine and hide. He held it on his arm and walked back toward the door. He did not open it. He only listened. Outside, snow shifted. A heavy body pressed against the wall. The hall groaned. The wolves moved around the structure. They circled it with slow steps. They smelled the smoke. They smelled the life inside. The storm pushed them into hunger. Runa closed her eyes. She bent forward over the newborn. The child slept. Leif raised his hand. Brand stayed still. They waited. A low howl grew in the distance. Another howl answered it, then silence. Brand lifted his axe again. Leif walked back to the fire. He set the shield on the ground. He pulled another piece of wood from the pile and placed it into the flames. "We keep the fire hot," Leif said. Brand nodded. "The wolves wait for weakness," Leif said. Brand pressed his lips together. He sat near the shield and kept the axe across his knees. Runa rocked the newborn. Her quiet movement stopped the shaking in her breath. She listened to the storm. It held no pause. It pressed itself into the night. Leif stood before the fire for a long time. He did not sit. He stayed tall, so Brand watched him. He kept strength in his stance. He knew the boy needed that. Brand looked at his father with steady eyes. He tried to match his breath to Leif's breath. Slow, even, strong. "You stay awake," Leif said. "I stay awake," Brand answered. Runa watched them both. She knew the boy no longer felt like a child. She saw the line in his jaw. She saw the strength in his arms. But she also saw fear in the corners of his eyes. The night moved. It held no moon. It held wind and weight. The snow pressed to the walls. Leif knew they needed more firewood. He looked toward the corner where the last small pile sat. They had fed the fire fast. The cold fed faster. He knelt by the pile. He counted the pieces. He did not speak the number. He stood again and looked toward the roof. He knew the storm stayed far from ending. Runa saw his face. She knew the meaning of his silence. "We have enough," she said. Leif nodded once, but she knew the nod only meant he heard her, not that he agreed. Brand saw it too. He held his axe tighter. He knew the fire needed more wood. He knew the storm blocked the door, but he also knew they stayed alive only with heat. His heart thumped. Leif walked toward the far corner of the hall. He pulled, away more furs. Behind them sat a chest made of old oak. He opened it. Inside lay tools, rope, a bone needle, a few pieces of deer hide. Under the hides sat a small bundle wrapped in wool. Leif lifted the wool bundle and unwrapped it. Inside sat strips of dried fish and dried meat. He held them in his hand and weighed them in silence. He wrapped them again and placed them back into the chest. Brand watched him. "Father," he said. Leif shook his head. "Later," he said. Brand lowered his gaze. Runa shifted the newborn. She lifted the child to her shoulder. The tiny face pressed against her neck. She felt the warm breath. The child stirred. A small sound left its mouth. Not a cry. A soft whine. Runa rocked again. She hummed a low tone, a simple tone older than stories. The child grew still. Leif listened to the sound. It steadied him. He took one breath, then another. He moved back to the fire and sat on a low stool. The firelight reached his face. The lines on his brow deepened. Runa looked at him. "We live," she said. He nodded. "We live if we stay warm," he said. Brand spoke. "I help," he said. Leif looked at him. "You help by staying awake," Leif said. Brand swallowed hard. "Then I stay awake," he said. The wind shook the hall again. A beam above them gave a long creak. Snow slid off the roof in a heavy wave. The sound hit the walls. Brand jumped. His axe slipped from his hand. He grabbed it fast. Leif rose again. He stepped to the beam. He pressed his hand against it and pushed. It held, but he knew each hour brought more weight. Runa shifted on the ground. Her legs ached from sitting. She leaned her back against the wall and pulled a fur over her knees. Leif returned to her side. He placed his hand on her shoulder. His touch held strength. "Sleep," he said. She shook her head. "I stay with the child," she said. Leif looked toward the boy. "Brand," he said. Brand looked at him. "Your mother needs rest," Leif said. Brand moved toward her at once. He brought another fur and placed it over her legs. Runa smiled at him. "You are strong," she said. Brand looked down at the newborn. "I guard both of you," he said. Runa closed her eyes. She leaned back. Her breath slowed. Leif checked the door again. He placed his ear to the wood. The wolves had moved on for now, but he knew they stayed near. Hunger drove them. He stepped back to the fire. He fed it one more piece of wood. The flames rose. The hall filled with warm light. He watched the glow move across the faces of his family. Runa slept in small breaths. The newborn slept curled against her chest. Bran stared into the fire. Leif sat on the stool again. He placed his axe across his knees. His hand rested on the handle. He listened to the storm push against the world. The night reached deeper. The cold pressed into the hall through every gap in the wood. Ice formed along the bottom of the door. Frost crept along the beams. Leif rose again and checked each support. The posts stayed in place. Bran spoke in a low voice. "Father, do storms like this end?" he asked. Leif looked at him. "They end," he said. Bran nodded. The wind held no pause. The roar stayed steady. The world outside felt far. Only the hall existed now. 4 people, 1 fire, 1 storm that tested each breath. Leif walked to the far side of the room. A thick pelt hung over the wall. He lifted it to check the logs behind it. The wood stayed strong, but he saw frost forming in the cracks. He lowered the pelt. Bran shifted his legs. He felt pins in his feet from cold. He stood and walked near the fire. He rubbed his legs with his hands. Leif watched him. "You move slow," Leif said. Bran nodded. "Yes, father." Leif stood near him. "Fear takes strength when you hide it. You speak it, then you control it," Leif said. Bran looked up. "I feel fear," he said. Leif placed his hand on Bran's shoulder. "Good. Fear keeps you awake. Awake keeps you alive," Leif said. Bran took a slow breath. His hand steadied. Runa stirred in her sleep. The newborn gave a soft cry. Runa shifted and lifted the child again. She pulled the small form close. The child settled. Leif moved toward them. He knelt and checked Runa's face. She opened her eyes. "I am here," she said. He nodded. "The storm grows strong," he said. She listened. She heard it. The newborn slept again. Runa stroked its head. Leif sat beside her. Brand looked at them all. He felt the storm push around them. But he also felt something firm in the room. The fire. The breath of his family. The steady stance of his father. The storm tried to break the hall. It tried to break the night. But the family stayed. They stayed awake. They stayed close. They held their warmth together. Leif leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He rested his breath. He kept one hand on the axe. He felt the rhythm of the storm through the wood. Bran watched him. Runa hummed a small tune again. The newborn slept. The night pressed on with no sign of end. But the family stayed strong inside the hall. The storm held on through the next stretch of night. No one in the family knew the hour. The fire marked time by the wood it consumed. Each piece that burned down told them the night still ruled. Leif stood again and rubbed frost from his beard. His joints ached from the cold. He moved in slow steps so he did not wake the newborn. Runa sat up with widened eyes. The storm shook the walls in short bursts now. It felt like the sky struck the hall with fists of wind. Bran sat close to the fire. He kept the axe in both hands. His fingers no longer shook. His breath stayed steady. He watched his father cross the hall and check the pelt covering the north wall again. Snow pressed against it from outside. The pelt puffed inward with each blast. Leif touched the log frame behind it and felt the hall tremble. Runa shifted the newborn to her other arm. She pulled another fur higher around her shoulders. The child made a small sound, then grew still. Runa stroked its back. She mouthed a small prayer, her voice too soft to rise above the fire. Leif turned from the wall and looked toward the door. Frost lined the edges. A thick crust sealed the bottom. Snow trapped the door from outside. He placed both palms on the wood and pushed. The hall groaned. The door did not move. He pushed again. Nothing changed. Brand rose. "Father," he said. Leif stepped back. "We stay inside until the wind rests," Leif said. Brand nodded. He watched the frost spread across the door like white veins. Runa spoke. "If the door stays locked by snow, how do we gather wood?" she asked. Leif did not answer at once. He looked toward the small pile near the fire. It grew small, not enough to last until dawn if the storm stayed strong. He stepped toward the pile and counted again in silence. Brand watched him. He swallowed with a dry throat. Leif spoke at last. "We break a piece of the bench if we need it," he said. Runa exhaled in relief. The bench ran along the wall and stretched across half the hall. Strong wood, enough to feed the fire longer. But Leif did not look at the bench for comfort. He looked toward the back of the hall. A low storage shelf sat by the far wall. It held a wooden tub filled with barley and dried roots. It also held 3 small wooden bowls. Behind it sat a thick board made from an old tree. Leif thought about that board. It would burn if they needed it to. Brand stepped beside him. "We use what we must," Brand said. Leif looked at him. "We use what we must," Leif said. Runa lowered her head and pressed her cheek to the newborn. The storm's roar eased for a moment. The hall grew quiet except for the crackle of the fire. They listened in silence. Brand leaned forward. Leif tilted his head. Runa stopped breathing for a heartbeat. Outside, the wind paused. In the gap, they heard a low crunch of snow. Then another. A step. Slow. Heavy. Leif raised his hand. Brand froze. Runa pressed the newborn tighter. The step came again. Then a scraping sound moved along the wall. Brand lifted his axe. Leif stepped toward the center of the room. "Do not move," Leif said. Runa held her breath. The sound traveled across the outer logs. Something large shifted the snow with weight. Not a wolf. Too heavy, too slow, too steady. Leif listened for the breath of the creature. Then he heard it, a low grunt, a deep exhale through thick lungs. Runa whispered, "A bear." Leif nodded once. A bear in winter should rest in its den. But storms woke beasts. Hunger woke them too. The bear smelled the hall, smelled warmth, smelled life. Brand stepped closer to his father. "We stay quiet," Leif said. The bear pressed its weight against the wall. The hall bowed inward for a moment. Runa gasped. The newborn stirred. Leif turned fast. "Keep the child still," he said. Runa rocked the newborn and hummed low. Her heart thumped against her ribs. The bear moved along the wall, slow and thoughtful. It pressed its snout to the cracks. It breathed in the heat. Leif listened. If the bear struck the hall again, the wall might crack. The storm kept snow packed high outside. If the wall broke, frost and beast would rush in at once. Brand trembled. He tightened his hands on the axe. His knuckles went white. Leif placed his hand on Brand's shoulder. "Do not strike unless it enters," Leif whispered. Brand nodded. The bear scratched at the wall. The logs groaned. Leif stepped forward and pressed his palm to the inner wood. He felt the force of the claw through the wood. He held his hand there until the bear stopped. Runa watched Leif. She feared the wall would break. She feared the bear would force its way inside. She pulled the fur higher around her. She kept the newborn pressed against her chest. The bear huffed again, then silence. Leif waited. Brand waited. Runa held her breath. Then a slow sound came. Heavy steps moved away. Snow shifted. The bear lumbered around the hall. Another grunt. Then nothing. Brand let out the breath he held. Gone, he whispered. Leif shook his head. It waits near, he said. Runa closed her eyes. Leif moved away from the wall and back to the fire. He fed the flames a small piece of wood, only one piece. They needed to stretch every bit. Brand looked at the fire, then at the bench. He moved to it. Father, he said. Leif turned. Brand pointed at the edge of the bench. We use this now, Brand said. Leif nodded. Break only the end, he said. Brand lifted his axe. He lined the blade at the far end of the bench. He struck. The wood cracked. He struck again. The bench broke in a clean split. He lifted the loose piece and carried it to the fire. It felt heavy enough for many hours. Leif placed a small piece of the bench into the flames. The hall brightened. The warmth grew. Runa smiled at the sight of the larger piece. This keeps us through some of the night, she said. Leif nodded. Brand sat close again. He looked toward the door. He listened for the bear. He heard only wind again. The storm returned. The pause had passed. Leif returned to the center of the hall. He checked every beam again. He pushed each support post. They held, for now. Runa shifted the newborn and pulled out a small fur to wrap around the child. She tucked it tight. The child slept with small breaths. Leif sat near her again. Food, he said. Runa looked up. Give the boy some dried meat, she said. Leif nodded. He stood and went to the chest again. He lifted the wool bundle. He unwrapped it and took one strip of dried meat. Only one. He handed it to Brand. Eat slow, Leif said. Brand took small bites. He chewed in silence. The salt touched his tongue. The warmth from the fire softened the meat. Runa watched him. She wanted to feed the newborn, but the child slept too deep to rouse. She rested instead. Leif placed the bundle back in the chest and closed it. Brand finished the strip and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Thank you, he said. Leif nodded. The storm beat harder against the hall. Snow struck the roof. Ice cracked at the edges. The family stayed close to the fire. Leif knew the next hours mattered most. The storm held its strongest winds now. Once this part passed, the rest of the night would ease. He stood and walked to the door. He placed his hand on the frost. A small crack formed along the wood. He pressed. The crack spread. Brand rose. Father, he said. Leif shook his head. The door froze from cold, not from weight. It stays shut until the wind weakens, Leif said. Brand sat again. The roof groaned under another wave of snow. One beam bent with a long creak. Runa gasped. Leif rushed to the beam. He pushed up with all his strength. The beam rose a hair. He grunted as he held it. Brand dropped his axe and ran to his father. He pushed up too. Their hands pressed against the wood. The beam lifted enough to ease the pressure. Runa stood, holding the newborn. She watched them both strain. Leif breathed out through clenched teeth. Hold it, he said. Brand pushed. He felt the beam shake. His muscles burned. Leif looked at him. Good. Hold, Leif said. Brand held until his arms ached. Then Leif told him to step back. Leif took a thick rope from the chest. He tied one end around the beam. He tied the other end around a lower support and pulled it tight. The rope strained, but held. Leif stepped back. The hull stands, he said. Brand breathed hard. Runa sat again. The newborn woke and cried. A small cry, thin but alive. She rocked the child and hummed. The storm drowned the sound, but the family heard it. Brand picked up his axe again. He sat near the bench and watched the fire. Leif sat on the stool once more. Storm's end, Leif said. Brand kept his eyes on the flames. When? He asked. Soon enough, Leif said. Runa stroked the newborn's cheek. The tiny body shook from the cold for a moment, then steadied in her arms. Leif leaned his elbows on his knees. "Tell the child a small story," he said. Runa looked at him. "About what?" she asked. "Something warm," Leif said. Runa nodded. She rocked the newborn. "Long ago," she said, "two brothers lived in a small hall near the sea. They fished in summer. They hunted in autumn. When winter came, they waited for storms in silence. One night, the wind broke their door, and cold rushed inside. But the brothers held each other in the dark. They lived because they kept their fire alive." Brand listened. His eyes softened a little. Runa kept going. "Those brothers grew old. Their children learned their ways. The storms never broke their halls again." Leif watched his wife. Her voice stayed low. Her calm held the family steady. The newborn drifted back to sleep. The wind howled again. The rope around the beam stretched tight. Frost spread along the edges of the walls. The fire cracked. Sparks rose. Leif stood once more. He went to the bench and broke off another small piece. He fed the fire. It brought heat back into the hall. Bran rubbed his hands again. Runa whispered. "This night tests us," she said. Leif looked toward her. "We stay awake. We stay warm," he said. Bran leaned back against the wall. "I do not sleep," he said. Leif smiled faintly. "Good," he said. The storm kept on, but the family still held strong. The hall still stood. The fire still burned. The newborn still breathed. The night moved, slow but steady, toward its next hour. The storm held them for many more hours. No one spoke of morning. Morning felt far. Leif stood again to stretch his legs. His back hurt from lifting the beam. His hands burned from cold. He walked in slow steps around the hall to keep his legs warm. He paused at each wall and listened. The wind pressed hard from the west now. Snow piled thick on that side. The hall leaned a small amount under its weight. Leif placed his palm on the north beam again. It stayed firm. The rope held tight. Bran shifted closer to the fire. He rubbed his feet. His boots stiffened from frost. He looked at his father. "How long since we woke?" Brand asked. Leif looked at the fire's size, then at the wood they burned, then at the marks on the walls left by shadows. "Half the night, maybe more," Leif said. Runa lifted her head. She listened with tired eyes. The newborn slept across her lap. She folded her arms around the small body and breathed slow. Brand leaned back again. He felt the ache in his arms from holding the beam. He lowered his axe but kept it close. He scanned the room with steady eyes. Leif stopped at the door again. Frost had grown thicker. The edges held small cracks. He pressed his shoulder to the wood. It did not move. He tried again. It stayed frozen shut. He stepped back. "Snow locks us in. The wind still grows," Leif said. Brand sat straighter. "We break the door when it stops," Brand said. Leif nodded. "When the storm rests," he said. Runa rocked the newborn. The firelight moved across the child's face. Leif looked toward the chest. He thought again about the dried food inside. He moved toward it and opened the lid. He unwrapped the wool bundle. Inside lay strips of dried fish and meat. Not many. He took one thin strip for Runa and held it out. She shook her head. "Give it to Brand," she said. Leif held her gaze. "You need strength." "Take it," he said. She took it and bit a small piece. She chewed slow. She saved some for later. Leif placed the bundle back in the chest. He closed the lid. Brand watched him. He knew the food would not last long, but he also knew they needed it spaced across the night. The hall shook again. A loud crack echoed across the beams. Runa flinched. Leif turned fast. Another crack followed. Snow slid from the roof. The sound hit like thunder. Bran jumped to his feet. "The roof," he said. Leif moved to the center beam and pressed his hand against it. The wood held, but shook. He looked toward the west wall. He lowered to the ground and lifted a small flap of fur that covered a gap near the floor. Snow pressed so tight outside that no air passed through. He dropped the fur. "The snowpack's higher than before," Leif said. Runa rocked the newborn. The child stirred and gave a small cry. Runa tucked it closer and hummed. Leif walked to the fire and added another piece of the benchwood. The flames rose. Heat spread across the hall. The warmth helped the frost retreat from Runa's cheeks. Brand leaned forward. "Father," he said. Leif looked at him. Brand pointed at the rafters. "The rope holds, but if more weight comes, we need more support," Brand said. Leif nodded. "Bring the last timber post," he said. Brand crossed the hall and lifted the post from the corner. He dragged it to the center. Leif lifted it and wedged it under the roof beam near the rope. He pushed until the post fit tight. The hall shook but steadied. Runa exhaled. "Good," she whispered. Leif tapped the post. It rang with strength. Brand let out a small breath. The wind shifted again. It lowered for a moment. The hall grew still. The sudden quiet felt strange. Runa raised her head. Leif stepped toward the center. Brand held his breath. In that quiet, they heard another sound. A low rumble. Slow, deep, heavy. It moved not along the wall, but farther out in the storm. Leif closed his eyes for a moment. "What is it?" Brand asked. Leif listened. The rumble grew. Snow shifted under weight. "Not a bear," Leif said. Brand swallowed. "Then what?" he asked. Leif shook his head. "Something large in the storm. The cold drives beasts from their dens. They wander until hunger pushes them close to halls," Leif said. Runa held the newborn tighter. She looked at the door. "It does not break through wood," she said. Leif looked at her with careful eyes. "It should not," he said. Brand gripped his axe again. He stood with feet apart. The rumble moved away, or the wind covered it. The hall filled again with the roar of the storm. Leif stepped back toward the fire. Brand shifted his weight. "Father," he said. Leif looked at him. "Why do storms like this come in winter?" Brand asked. Leif sat on the stool. He rubbed frost from his beard. "Cold wants the land. When the sea freezes, the sky sends storms. When storms grow strong, beasts leave their dens. People stay in halls until the sky grows soft again," Leif said. Runa looked at the fire. "Storms take the weak first," she said. Leif nodded. Brand looked into the flames. "We are not weak," he said. Leif gave him a slow nod. "No, we are not weak," Leif said. Runa stroked the newborn's cheek. "This child lives," she said. Leif looked toward her. "Yes," Leif said. The wind struck the hall again. Snow blew hard against the roof. Frost spread across the beams. The fire sputtered for a moment, then flared back. Leif stood once more. He needed to check the supports again. He pressed each beam. He touched the rope. His hand stayed steady. Brand watched him. "Father," he said. Leif turned. Brand pointed at the far corner. "Look," he said. Leif walked over. A thin line of cold air moved along the bottom of the far wall. The wind found a crack in the logs. Leif knelt and pressed his hand over it. Frost formed fast. He lifted his hand and saw the gap widen. Runa stood. "Is it bad?" she asked. Leif rested his palm on the wood. "The wind finds weaknesses first. We block it," Leif said. Brand moved fast. He grabbed a deer hide from the shelf and handed it to his father. Leif pressed the hide against the gap and wedged it with a thin piece of wood. The hide sealed the crack. Brand stepped back. The cold air stopped. Leif nodded. Good, he said. Runa sat again and rocked the newborn. A long crack sounded from the roof. Leif jumped to his feet. He rushed to the center beam. Brand ran beside him. They pressed their shoulders into the beam. It bent under the weight of snow. Push, Leif said. Brand pushed. His arms shook. His breath tightened. Leif grunted. The beam rose a hair. Snow shifted overhead. Runa held the newborn and watched with wide eyes. The firelight shook across the walls. Leif pushed harder. His back ached. The beam held. Brand stepped back and clutched his ribs. Father, he said between breaths. Leif lowered his arms and leaned on the beam for support. Good work, Leif said. Brand nodded. Runa looked at them both. You hold the hall, she said. Leif shook his head. The hall holds because we stand together, he said. Brand breathed in slow. His lungs hurt from cold and effort. He sat near the fire again. Leif walked to him. You grow strong tonight. Storms shape boys. Storms shape women and men too. The land does not give strength. Nights like this give it, Leif said. Brand looked up. Then I gain strength now, Brand said. Leif nodded. Runa placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. You keep us safe with your father, she said. Brand lowered his head with pride. The storm roared again, but something changed in the sound. The wind held a new tone, not as sharp, not as heavy. Leif heard it. He moved to the door and pressed his ear against the wood. The storm lightens, Leif said. Brand rose. Now, he asked. Soon, Leif said. Runa let out a breath. The newborn stirred. Runa lifted her tunic slightly and fed the child. The small lips moved slow. The child breathed warm against her skin. Brand watched them. He felt warmth return to his chest, not from the fire, from the sight of life still held in the storm. Leif walked across the hall and checked the hide over the crack again. It held firm. He knelt and looked through the small hole near the floor. He brushed it with his hand. Snow still pressed tight outside. No light came through, but the pressure shifted. The snow no longer pressed with the same force. Brand stepped close. When snow settles, we open the door, Brand said. Leif nodded. We survive this, Brand said. Leif looked at him with steady eyes. Yes, we survive this, Leif said. The wind dropped slightly. The hall grew less tense. The beam stopped creaking for a moment. The fire warmed the room in a deeper way. Runa closed her eyes and leaned her head back. The newborn slept again in her arms. The storm kept on, but the worst passed. Leif felt it. Brand felt it. Runa sensed it. Leif fed the fire another piece of the bench. The flames rose bright. Brand held the axe and sat near his mother. Runa stroked his hair. Sleep a moment if you need it, she said. Brand shook his head. I stay awake, he said. Leif smiled with tired eyes. Good, but rest your body, Leif said. Brand leaned his back against the wall. He kept the axe across his lap. Leif paced the hall again. This time his steps felt lighter. His hands no longer shook. Runa whispered. The sky softens, she said. Leif nodded. We hold until morning, he said. Brand looked toward the door. Frost still covered it, but he no longer feared the sight. The hall stood. The supports held. The family lived. Wind still shook the logs from time to time, but each blast grew softer. The night moved closer to its slow end. The storm shifted into a slow grind, not calm, not safe, only less violent. The hall no longer bowed with each gust. The beams no longer cried under the weight of snow. Leif listened for many breaths before he spoke. His voice stayed low so he did not wake the newborn. The storm turns weak now, he said. Brand lifted his head. His eyes looked heavy from the long night, but he stayed awake. He pushed his back harder against the wall to steady himself. He gripped the axe. His fingers stayed strong. Runa looked toward the door. Frost covered it in thick layers. The edges held ice that glowed faint blue in the firelight. She rocked the newborn with small movements. The child slept in deep rhythm with her breaths. Leif walked to the door again. He placed his hand on the wood. He felt less pressure from outside now. He pressed his shoulder against it. The door held firm, but no longer felt locked by the storm's force. He stepped back and studied the frost lines. Bran stood. "Is it time?" he asked. Leif shook his head. "Not yet. When the wind drops lower, we strike the door. If we strike too soon, snow pours in," Leif said. Bran sat down again, but kept his eyes on the door as if it might speak. Leif moved toward the fire. The wood burned low. The bench pieces helped, but the fire needed more soon. He lifted another small piece from the broken bench edge and placed it into the flames. The fire rose with a warm crackle. Light touched the walls and softened the cold along the floor. Runa shifted her legs. Her knees hurt from holding the same position for hours. She pulled the fur higher around her. Her fingers trembled from cold and lack of rest. Leif saw it. He knelt beside her. "You need rest," he said. She shook her head. "I do not sleep while you stand," she said. Leif placed his hand over hers. "You rest." "I watch," he said. Runa lowered her eyes. She leaned her head back against the wall, but she did not sleep. She rocked the newborn in slow circles. Brand looked toward her. "Mother, I can hold the child if you need," he said. Runa smiled faintly. "Not yet." "Soon," she said. The hall creaked under one last push of wind. Snow slid off the roof in a soft rush. Leif straightened. He listened. The wind slowed further. It no longer sounded sharp. It no longer struck with force. It moved in softer waves now. Leif walked back to the door. Brand rose again. "Father," he said. Leif raised his hand. "Wait," he said. He listened for long breaths. The wind still moved, but it moved like tired breath now, not like a beast. Leif pressed his palm to the door again. The frost felt thin near the edges. Runa watched them both. Her heart beat slow, but strong. Leif stepped to the center of the hall. "Brand," he said. Brand walked toward him. "Take your axe. Stand near the door. When I tell you, strike the frost at the lower edge, not the wood." "Only the frost," Leif said. Brand nodded. "Yes, father." Runa straightened her back. "Be careful," she said. Leif lifted his own axe. He walked to the door and stood to the side. He touched the frost with the flat of the axe head. A thin crack formed. Frost fell to the ground. Brand lifted his axe. He held it ready. Leif nodded. "Strike once, only once." "Hit the frost," Leif said. Brand swung with control. The blade hit the frost edge. Ice shattered into thin shards. A pale cloud puffed out around the blade. Leif pressed his shoulder against the door. He felt it shift, not enough to open, but enough to show the snow lost some hold. "Again," Leif said. Brand swung. Frost cracked wider. More ice fell. Leif pressed again. The door creaked. Runa rose to her feet with the newborn in her arms. She stepped back from the door. Leif looked at Brand. "One more," he said. Brand swung with more force. The frost shattered down the full left side of the door. The axe head hit only the ice, not the wood. Leif braced his feet. He pushed with all his strength. The door shifted. A thin line of light, pale and faint, appeared along the edge. Brand gasped. "Light," Brand said. Runa stepped closer but stayed back far enough to avoid falling snow. Leif grunted and pushed harder. The door inched open. A flood of snow poured in at once, not heavy, not deep, a shallow wave that spread across the floor. Leif stepped aside. Brand stepped back. Cold wind rushed in for a moment, then faded. The storm weakened enough to let them breathe the air outside. Leif held the door open with his shoulder. "Brand, bring the shield," Leif said. Brand grabbed the pine and hide shield and brought it to him. Leif angled the shield outside the door. He used it to push snow aside without stepping out. Snow shifted and fell in heavy lumps. A narrow gap opened near the doorframe. Runa watched with tight breath. Leif lowered the shield. "Brand," he said. Brand stepped beside him. "I go out first. You hold the door. When I return, you brace it. Do not let snow push it shut," Leif said. Brand nodded. "Yes, father," Runa spoke. "Do you leave the hall now?" she asked. Leif turned to her. "Only a step, only enough to clear the way." "I do not leave you in this storm," he said. Runa held the newborn close. She nodded. Leif stepped forward. The wind touched his face. Snow stung his skin. He leaned out of the hall and looked toward the world beyond. Darkness still ruled, but the sky held a softer tone. The snow near the hall rose up to his knees. He pushed it with the shield again. More snow shifted. Brand held the door firm. His breath grew tight as he watched his father step half into the storm. Leif looked out across the land. Nothing moved. No wolves, no bear, no shape, only snow piled high and wind that lost its strength. Leif stepped back inside. "Good," he said. Brand let out a breath he had held too long. Leif shut the door only halfway. He left a thin slit open to let the wind's sound reach them. He pressed a broken piece of bench wood against the bottom of the door to keep it from sealing again. Runa exhaled in relief. "The storm weakens," Leif said. Brand sat again. His legs shook a little from fear and cold. Leif went to the fire. He fed it another piece of wood. The flames rose. Runa sat down and held the newborn again. The child moved its hands and made small noises. Runa stroked its cheek. Brand looked toward the door. "Father," he said. Leif turned. Brand pointed at the slit of light. "This storm looks stronger than others." "Why did it strike so early in winter?" Brand asked. Leif sat down. "Some winters hold peace. Some winters hold storms early. The land shifts each year. The sea brings cold fast this season. The wind brings ice with it," Leif said. Runa looked at the door. "And we live through it," she said. Leif nodded. "We live through it," he said. Brand leaned forward. "Father, do other families face storms like this tonight?" Brand asked. Leif stared at the fire. "Some do, some fell, some halls broke, some fires died. Storms pick their targets with no thought," Leif said. Brand felt a shiver move up his spine. Runa whispered, "We keep our hall strong, we keep our fire, we keep our breath. This child sees morning," she said. Leif looked at her. "Yes," he said. The wind outside lowered again. The hall grew still. The bench wood cracked softly in the fire. Brand leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. His breath slowed. He stayed awake but felt warmth reach his chest. Runa rocked the newborn. She hummed a tone older than memory. The newborn's breaths grew soft and steady. Leif stood and walked across the hall again. He checked each beam. They held. The rope stayed tight. The pelt covering the crack in the wall stayed firm. No more cold seeped through. Brand lifted his head. "Father," he said. Leif turned back. Brand looked toward the roof. "When morning comes, snow sits on the roof." "Do we climb to clear it?" Brand asked. Leif nodded. "We clear all of it. If we let it rest, it grows harder. Roof breaks in next storm if we leave it," Leif said. Brand set his jaw. "I climb with you," he said. Leif gave him a slow nod. "Yes, You climb with me. Runa looked toward them. Not until the wind stops. Not until the day grows bright, she said. Leif nodded. We wait for calm light, he said. Bran sat near the fire again. He pushed another small log into the center. The flames rose and filled the hall with new heat. Leif watched the fire with careful eyes. We stretch this as long as we need, he said. Bran looked at Runa. Mother, he said. Runa lifted her eyes. Bran continued. What name will the child have? He asked. Runa smiled faintly. When the sun touches the hall again, we choose a name with light. We choose a name with warmth. This child lives through a hard night. This child gets a strong name, she said. Bran nodded. The hall grew quiet except for the fire and the soft wind outside. Leif leaned against the wall near the door. His breath slowed. He watched the slit of pale light grow a little brighter. The night still held them, but the storm lost its strength. The worst part passed. Runa whispered to the sleeping newborn. Morning comes, she said. Leif listened to the wind. Morning comes, he said. The first thin gray of morning touched the edge of the sky. No sun, no color, only a weak band of pale light that cut through the storm's last breath. Leif saw it through the narrow slit of the open door. He stepped closer and placed his hand along the frame. Ice no longer bit his skin as before. The wind no longer tore through the gap. It whispered instead. Quiet, tired, ready to fall silent, Bran woke from a brief blink of rest. His eyes snapped open when the cold touched his face. He pulled the axe close and rose to his feet. His legs felt stiff. His shoulders hurt. But he stood tall. Runa sat with the newborn held firm against her chest. The child slept with a deeper peace now that the storm's roar had faded. Runa watched Leif with calm eyes, though her breath still shook from long hours. Leif pressed his shoulder against the door. Snow moved. A heavy block shifted and slid into the hall. It piled at his feet. He stepped back. Bran rushed to his side. I help, Bran said. Leif nodded. Push slow, Leif said. Together they pushed the door and cleared the lower edge. More snow slid in. Cold air swept across the floor. Runa pulled the fur tighter around the newborn. The fire hissed under the sudden cold. Leif stopped pushing. We wait. We use the shield again, he said. Bran grabbed the shield before Leif asked. He handed it to him. Leif stepped halfway outside and angled the shield to one side. He pushed snow with slow, steady strokes. Snow slid away from the entrance in thick sheets. His breath rose in pale clouds. His beard froze again. His fingers burned from cold. Bran watched him with tight breath. Do you feel the cold strong, father? He asked. Leif grunted. Cold only hurts when you fear it. I fear none of it now, he said. Bran's grip on the axe tightened with pride. Leif cleared enough space to step fully outside. He planted his boots deep into the snow. Both sank past his ankles. Snow came almost to his knees. He looked across the land. White, endless white. Smooth waves shaped by the wind. Ridges rose where drifts curled into dunes. The land felt silent. No wolves, no bear, no movement at all. Bran stepped beside him. The world disappears, Bran said. Leif nodded slowly. Storms erase everything until the land chooses to show it again, Leif said. Bran stared across the plain. Do we leave the hall now? He asked. Leif shook his head. We clear the roof first, then check the walls, then gather wood. Then the day tells us what comes next, Leif said. Bran stepped back inside for a moment. He looked at Runa. Mother, he said. Runa lifted her eyes. We clear the roof soon, Brand said. She nodded. Be careful, the snow hides traps. Move slow, she said. Brand held her gaze. I move slow. Runa touched the newborn's cheek. Morning gives the child warmth. The night did not take us, she said. Brand breathed deep at her words. Strength rose in him again. Leif stepped back inside. We take the ladder from the far wall, he said. Brand moved fast. He lifted the short ladder made from tied branches. He carried it across the hall. Leif took it from him and set it near the door. Runa rose to her feet, still holding the newborn. The wind still touches the world. Will you go up now? She asked. Leif looked at the small, pale line of dawn. Not until the wind sleeps more. Soon, he said. Brand paced near the fire. He wanted to climb now. He wanted to shake the snow off the roof and hear it fall free. But he trusted Leif's judgment. Leif walked the hall once more. He checked the beams. The rope held strong. The posts stayed firm. He moved to the back wall and touched the hide covering the gap. It did not move. The crack sealed with frost. Runa watched them both carefully. This hall held through the worst, she said. Leif turned. It held because we held it, he said. Brand looked toward the open slit of light again. The sky grows brighter, he whispered. Leif stepped closer to the door and watched the wind push only the top layer of snow now. It is time, Leif said. Brand stood tall. Runa held the newborn tighter. You go slow, she said. Leif nodded. Brand, bring the ladder, he said. Brand lifted it again and carried it outside. Snow reached his knees. The cold stung his legs. He set the ladder against the side of the hall. It sank slightly. Leif pushed it deeper into the snow so it stayed firm. Brand looked at the roof. Snow sits heavy, Brand said. Leif studied it. He climbed first. He placed his foot on the first rung. It held. He climbed slow, testing each rung. He reached the roof and placed one hand on the snow. It did not collapse. He pulled himself up. Brand climbed after him. Once on the roof, Brand saw how deep the snow lay. It rose nearly to his thighs. It felt like a soft mountain layered across the hall. Leif held the shield. He used it as a shovel. He pushed snow off the roof in wide arcs. It fell in thick sheets to the ground. Brand followed his lead. He used his hands to pull chunks aside. Snow numbed his fingers at once. Below, Runa stepped outside with the newborn wrapped in 2 layers of fur. She stood near the door and watched them clear the roof. Her breath left her lips like smoke. The newborn moved its small head under the furs. Leif pushed more snow. The roof beams beneath them felt lighter with each load thrown off. He moved with slow strength, breath after breath. Brand worked hard to match his pace. His arms shook, his fingers burned, his legs felt heavy. But he kept going. He looked at his father and pushed harder. Leif noticed. Do not rush, steady pace, slow gives strength. Fast takes it, Leif said. Brand nodded and slowed. Runa moved closer to the roof. You clear enough. Come down for warmth, she said. Leif glanced toward her. Soon. We clear all. Then we rest, he said. Brand looked down at her. The child sleeps? Yes. The child sleeps warm, Runa said. Brand smiled, then returned to the snow. Leif switched sides of the roof. He pushed more snow until the wood showed. Brand did. The same. Soon half the roof showed the timber beneath. The other half still sat under deep piles. Brand moved to the far side. His foot sank deeper than before. He fell to one knee. Snow swallowed his leg. Father, he said with alarm. Leif turned fast. He crawled across the roof and reached Brand's arm. He pulled him up slow so the snow did not slide under him. Brand stood again and breathed fast. Leif steadied him with his hand. You tread soft. The roof weakens in some places after storms, Leif said. Bran nodded. I feel it, he said. Leif looked him in the eyes. Fear keeps you alive, but control the fear, he said. Bran took a slow breath and steadied himself. Runa spoke from below. I saw. Are you hurt? She asked. Bran shook his head. No, I'm strong. Runa held the newborn tight. Take care, snow hides danger, she said. Leif pushed more snow until wood showed across almost the whole roof. Only one small patch remained. Brand reached it first. He scooped snow with both arms and pushed it off the roof. The last of the snow fell in a heavy sheet. Leif placed his hand on the timber of the roof. Good, the weight gone. The hall breathes, he said. Bran nodded. We climb down now, father? Yes. Slow steps, Leif said. They climbed down together. Leif held the ladder until Brand reached the bottom. Then he climbed down after him. Runa stepped forward. She touched Brand's shoulder. Good work, she said. Brand lifted his chin. We saved the hall, he said. Leif nodded. We saved ourselves first. Then the hall. Storms do not break those who stand together, he said. Brand smiled. Leif looked out across the land again. Now we check the wall and gather wood, Leif said. Brand stepped beside him. Where do we find wood under snow? Brand asked. Leif pointed toward a small stand of trees not far from the hall. Their branches poked through the snow like dark bones. There, we take only what fell before the storm. We do not cut live wood in deep winter if we can help it, Leif said. Brand nodded. Runa stepped back inside the hall. Bring some roots or sticks for smoke. The hall needs warm air again. The newborn grows hungry, she said. Leif walked toward the trees. Brand followed, lifting his legs through the high snow. Each step felt heavy, but he pushed forward. They reached the trees. Branches lay half buried under the snow. Leif knelt and dug with his hands. He found a fallen branch thick enough to burn long. He pulled it free. Snow fell away from it in clumps. Brand found a smaller piece. He lifted it and shook the snow off. Good, Leif said. They carried the branches back to the hall. Snow pushed against their legs. Cold air bit their faces, but they moved steady. When they reached the hall, Runa waited with the newborn wrapped thick. She stepped aside so they could carry the wood inside. Brand placed the wood near the fire. Leif split the large branch with the axe. He added a piece to the flames. The fire grew in strength. Heat filled the hall again. Runa smiled. The hall warms. The child rests strong, she said. Brand sat by the fire and warmed his hands. Pain shot up his fingers as the heat returned, but he held steady. Leif sat on the stool. The land gives peace again. The storm leaves. But we stay ready. The next night asks for strength too, he said. Brand looked at his father. I face any night now, Brand said. Leif nodded. Good. You grow into yourself. Runa rocked the newborn. This child lived through the first storm of life. The name must honor strength, she said. Leif looked at the child. It will. When the sun rises, we choose. Brand smiled. Then the sun must rise soon, he said. Leif nodded. It rises slow after storms, but it comes. The wind eased more. Snow settled. The hall grew warm. The family stayed close to the fire. Morning crept forward with quiet steps. The pale morning rose slow. Light crept across the snow-covered land like a thin breath after long silence. Leif stepped outside again and scanned the horizon. The storm left high drifts, deep pockets, and smooth fields shaped by hours of violent wind. But the sky above now held a soft gray glow. No sharp wind, no roar, only a hushed stillness. Brand followed him out. His boots sank into the snow with each step. His legs still ached from climbing the roof and carrying wood, but he stood tall. His breath left his mouth in small, cloudy shapes. Runa stayed in the doorway with the newborn wrapped in 2 furs. The child slept with steadier breaths. The air outside still carried cold, but not the kind that sliced at skin. Runa let the child feel a small edge of the morning air, then tucked it back close. Leif looked at the path that once led to the distant village. It sat buried now. Only a faint dip in the snow showed where the road once lay. He squinted toward the far hills. No smoke rose from any halls. No movement crossed the white plain. Brand stepped beside him. "Do you think the other families lived through the storm?" Brand asked. Leif studied the hills again. Some, not all. Storms choose their own way. Halls fall when wood weakens. Fires die when fear grows, Leif said. Brand swallowed. "Then we check when the sun climbs higher," Brand said. Leif nodded. "Yes, but we do not leave far until the child eats and the hall sits warm again," Leif said. Runa stepped down from the doorway. Snow crunched under her feet. She held the newborn close. The hall stands, the roof cleared. The food held through the night. "We take the morning slow," she said. Leif reached out and touched the newborn's head under the furs. "The child lives strong. The name waits for sunlight," Leif said. Brand looked toward the sky. "It grows brighter now," Brand said. Leif placed one hand over his brow and watched the east. The light thickened. The gray turned toward pale silver. Runa looked at both of them. "Come inside. Warm first. Then speak of names," she said. Leif nodded. They stepped in. The fire glowed steady now, fed by the wood Brand gathered. Heat filled the hall. Frost melted along the lower logs. The rope around the beam loosened slightly as the timber lifted under its own strength again. Brand sat near the fire. He stretched his legs. His muscles trembled from effort. He rubbed his arms and let warmth reach his skin. Runa sat near him. She rested the newborn in her lap. The child stirred and opened its mouth. It gave a small cry. Runa shifted and fed the child. The fire crackled beside them. Leif walked the hall again. He checked the hide over the crack. He pressed his hand to the logs along the wall. The frost retreated. The hall breathed easier now. Brand watched him. "Father," he said. Leif turned. The storm tested the hall. "But the hall held," Brand said. Leif nodded. "The hall held because we strengthened it, because we stayed awake, because we fed the fire. Storms break. Those who stand alone," Leif said. Brand stood and placed his hand on the beam he helped hold through the night. "We stood together," Brand said. Runa looked toward them with soft eyes. "And we lived together," she said. The newborn finished feeding and fell asleep again. Runa pulled the fur around it and rocked it slow. Leif sat on the stool and placed his axe on his lap. His arms felt heavy, his back ached, but his breath stayed strong. Brand stepped to the door and opened the slit wider. Light seeped in. He looked out at the snow-covered world. "Father, the day grows." "We choose the name now," Brand said. Runa looked down at the newborn. "Yes." The child lived the first storm, the first night. "The child sees the first morning," she said. Leif stood and walked to her. He knelt beside her. The child came into the world under wind and darkness. The child lived through frost and fear. The child holds strength from the first breath. "We choose a name that fits the morning," Leif said. Brand stepped closer. "What name?" he asked. Runa looked at the newborn's face. The child breathed slow, skin warm from her arms and the fire. The sun rises after the darkest night. The child waits for that light. When the sun touches the hall, we say the name, she said. Leif nodded. Yes, we wait for the sun. Brand looked toward the sky again. It climbs slow, Brand said. Leif placed his hand on Brand's shoulder. Slow brings truth. Storms take time to leave. Light takes time to return, Leif said. Runa smiled at both of them. We sit and wait for the first line of sun to touch the wall. They waited. The fire warmed the hall. The newborn slept. The storm faded behind them. Silence filled the space at last. Brand stood by the door and listened. No wind, no wolves, no bear, only the soft sound of settling snow. Leif stepped outside again. The air felt sharp, but no longer cruel. He walked a few steps across the snow to check the land. He saw the trees bent under ice, the hills covered thick, the sky clearing with slow movement. Brand joined him. They stood side by side and watched the horizon. Mother said storms test the weak first, Brand said. Leif nodded. The storm tested us, but we did not fall, Leif said. Brand lifted his chin. I felt fear, but I did not break. Does fear leave me now? Brand asked. Leif looked at him with calm eyes. Fear stays. It keeps your mind sharp. It keeps your breath strong. Fear keeps you alive, but you control it. It does not control you now, Leif said. Brand breathed slow. Then I hold fear like a tool, Brand said. Leif nodded. Yes. Runa stepped outside with the newborn wrapped tight. The light grows, she said. They all turned toward the east. The gray brightened. A thin gold edge formed under the clouds. It touched the snow in a faint band. Leif stepped closer. There. That is sun, he said. Brand smiled. The first sun after the storm. Runa lifted the newborn so the light touched its face. This child lived through the darkest night. This child takes the name Solvi, she said. Leif spoke it with her. Solvi. Brand said it too. Solvi. The newborn stirred, as if hearing the sound. Runa held the child close. Solvi lives strong, she said. Leif placed his hand on the child's head. The storm passed. The hall held. The family stood. Solvi sees the light of the first morning. A strong sign, Leif said. Brand stepped beside them. Solvi grows to face stronger winters. And I guard the hall for both of you, he said. Runa smiled. You guard us well. Leif looked across the land again. We rest for now, then we check for others. Storms end, but the land needs hands. Neighbors need help. Fallen halls need aid, he said. Brand nodded. We walk when the sun rises higher. Runa stepped inside. We warm the hall first. Solvi needs heat, and we need strength before we walk, she said. They all returned inside. The fire glowed bright. The hall carried the smell of warm wood. Frost melted along the edges of the walls. Leif sat down. Brand sat beside him. Runa settled near the fire with Solvi wrapped safe. For a long moment, they spoke no words. Silence belonged to the hall after the long storm. Then Leif looked at Brand. This night shaped you. You hold strength from it now. You hold calm. You hold steadiness, Leif said. Brand nodded. I felt the storm press my chest, but I stayed awake. I held the beam. I walked the roof. I stood with you. I lived the night that others feared. Leif smiled faintly. Yes, you lived it. Runa stroked Solvi's small hand, and Solvi lived the first night of life in the hardest cold. Brand smiled. A strong start. Leif stood. The day moves. We gather our strength. Then we walk to see who needs help. Runa nodded. Solvi and I wait here with fire. You both go when ready. Leif touched her shoulder. We go only when the sky grows warmer. Brand tightened his grip on his axe. I stand ready. Leif looked at him. You stand as your father stands. The fire crackled. The hall warmed more. The newborn slept again. The storm stayed only as a memory now, one the family would speak of for many seasons, one that shaped them all, one that gave Solvi a name in the first light of morning. Leif looked toward the door. The land waits for our steps. Bran stood beside him. I walk with you when you call. Runa held Solvi close. We stay strong today. The storm taught us that. Leif nodded. Yes, the storm taught us, and we listen. The morning light spread across the hall. Snow outside glowed. The world held peace again. You stayed with this family through the storm. You walked each step with them. You felt the cold, the weight, the long hours. Thank you for sharing this calm moment after the hardest night. In the next story, we meet another soul who faced winter alone and found strength in silence. Before you leave, take a slow breath. Rest your shoulders. Stay warm. I offer you a small free gift soon in the next tale. Until then, keep the fire steady and return when you want another quiet Viking night.